films, animated series, and documentaries that glorify God by upholding His standards. Find out how AFS can impact your family and friends at AmericanFamilyStudios.net.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview.
The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Thursday, November 21st, and the transgender bathroom debate is alive and well. I mean, yeah, this has been kind of going on for the last decade. We all remember this when we were boycotting Target over allowing men in the women's restroom, and it has only gotten more and more perverse. And this time the fight is coming to Capitol Hill with the election of Representative, he calls himself Sarah McBride, but it is a man who dresses as a woman. And Speaker Johnson released a statement yesterday on women's only spaces in the U.S. Capitol. He said this: all single-sex facilities in the Capitol and House office buildings, such as restrooms, changing rooms, and locker rooms, are reserved for individuals of that biological sex. It is important to note that each member office has its own private restroom, and unisex restrooms are available throughout the Capitol. Women deserve women's only spaces. Yes, absolutely. This is just common sense. It is a reality. And so the American Family Association just moments ago this morning released a statement commending Speaker Mike Johnson's statement on women's only spaces in the U.S. Capitol. And Walker Wildman, our vice president here at AFA, said this: society is better when the inherent differences between men and women are respected and biological reality is upheld. This is not about disrespecting or devaluing anyone who disagrees, but rather affirming the dignity of women and ensuring that their privacy and security are preserved. By standing firm on this issue, Speaker Johnson has shown his commitment to protecting the values that strengthen our communities and our families. So Walker joins me now. Good morning, and I'm happy to finally see some common sense from a Speaker of the House.
Yeah, Jenna, good morning. Speaker Mike Johnson finally kind of looked around and found a little bit of backbone. It took him a couple hours yesterday, but it was good to see him finally come out, after he got kind of caught off guard at this press conference in the Capitol and gave the milquetoast answer that we just heard during the news break. But then he came out a couple hours later and clarified his correct view of human sexuality and the fact that we don't want dudes in women's restrooms in the Capitol building. So that was good to see, and we applaud Speaker Johnson for his truthful stance on this issue. But to your point, this has been about a decade since we were battling Target over this issue, the Target Corporation, and then we had the North Carolina a debate in North Carolina over bathrooms where major corporations said they were going to boycott North Carolina over this issue. I think it was House Bill 2. So the point, what I want to point out to our audience is that this shows how quickly the left pivots. And what I'm saying by that is they went from Obergefell, the Supreme Court ruling, love is love, to adults ought to be able to make decisions on who they have relationships with, to we ought to be able to have men in women's bathrooms. And then now they're going after our children with this transgender insanity and the mutilation of children. So it shows if we don't draw a line in the sand and have a truthful stance, then the other side, many of them pagans and unbelievers, they're going to continue to encroach upon people's rights. And so this issue itself isn't about, what an adult wants to do, in their own privacy, even though that's a weak argument when it comes to morality. But this is about whether other congresswomen, true congresswomen, are going to have to go in the locker room in the Capitol with a grown man. I mean, who wants that? Nobody should want that. So Speaker Johnson, good for him. And we've got to draw a line in the sand when it comes to human sexuality. And the last thing I want to mention before I pitch it back to you is that, the left claims that gender is fluid and that it's just a man-made construct. But yet these men who have gender dysphoria, they want to wear dresses. And it's just a weird thing that they want to wear dresses, but yet they say gender is a man-made construct and we don't even know what a woman is, but yet they want to go with the traditional natural feminine look, which is to wear, attractive female-like attire, but yet they don't know what a woman is, and they want to erase, traditional understanding of femininity. So they can't have it both ways. Either we know what a woman is and we know what being feminine is, or we don't.
That's a great point. I mean, we don't have any of these so-called trans women who look like men. I mean, they all try to look like what the common perception is of a woman, and they want to have soft features. They even wear lipstick. They grow out their hair longer. They wear feminine cultural attire. And even though, yes, different styles and fashion can change depending on the culture, each culture has had a very clear difference between what looks like women's attire versus what looks like male attire. And so they're still caught in that binary. And to me, Walker, one of the most obvious repudiations of Representative McBride actually conceding that, of course, he's a man, is that he said, even though I might disagree with it, I'm not going to contest this with Speaker Johnson. He sets the rules. No woman, and I say this as a woman, knowing what a woman is, no woman would ever agree to just use the men's bathroom. So we know that he knows he's a man because he's comfortable with it. No woman would be comfortable with doing that. But this is where you mentioned the bright line that conservatives need to draw. And you're absolutely right that this isn't just about the trans issue, because one of the things that even though Representative Nancy Mace, who has been very outspoken in the last couple of days on this issue, she posted a tweet on X that says this: "We support gay marriage and voted for the Respect for Marriage Act twice. However, if you think protecting a woman is discrimination, you are the problem. We don't care if you're trans. If you have the male genitalia, we don't want you in the women's bathroom." And she's totally missing the point, because absolutely we care what a marriage is. We care that trans isn't actually a thing. A man can't become a woman. And so she's trying to accommodate without having her bathroom encroached upon, and that just leads to confusion.
It does, absolutely, and I'm glad you brought this up. I saw that X post this morning, and I saw Allie Beth Stuckey's response and some of the other replies to it. The reality is this is what happens when you have political and economic populism and nationalism. Although there's nothing wrong inherently with populism and nationalism. I'm a populist and a nationalist, and I'm proud of it. As a matter of fact, people can call me a Christian nationalist, and I take that as a badge of honor. But when you try to have populism or Republican platformism and you don't have any real set moral principles, this is what you get. You have Representative Nancy Mace, who has been good on this issue of men and women's bathrooms over the last week or so, but then she comes out and say, "Oh, and by the way, just so y'all know, I'm all-inclusive. I'm fully in support of homosexual marriage." You can't have it both ways. The reason we have, I want people to, if they don't get anything out of the interview but this 30 seconds, I want them to get this. The reason we have the gender dysphoria, transgender debate is because we capitulated as a culture on the issue of human sexuality and what is marriage. That's a fundamental fact. If we can't define marriage, now we're having questions about whether or not we can define what a woman is. So you can't capitulate on one moral issue and then all of a sudden want to put your flag in the ground, at the 50-yard line after you've already capitulated on the basic fundamentals of biblical truth and Christianity.
Well said, absolutely, and it is the exact same rational premise as why the pro-life debate has gotten to the point that we're even discussing partial birth abortion, because when and if anyone concedes that abortion is okay at 12 weeks or 15 weeks or the first trimester or however you want to arbitrarily define when personhood or life begins, and you don't stick with the bright line empirical, objective standard that life begins at conception, then everything is arbitrary and negotiable after that. And it's the same thing that we've done with human sexuality and the definition of marriage and women and why we find ourselves in this debate, because if we don't have the arbitrary bright line that marriage as a definition is between one man and one woman in principle, then we are conceding everything else that follows in an arbitrary standard. And so then when we try to have the cutoff at 12 weeks or a heartbeat bill, or we say, well, gay marriage is fine, but transgenderism goes too far, or, gay marriage is fine, but two men adopting a baby or having a surrogate conceive one and we're commoditizing children, well, that goes too far. We've already conceded the argument because we have conceded the principle and the bright line standard.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And here's what our movement has to do better at. And I'm talking, of course, to evangelical Christians, but even people who lean conservative or even have sympathies towards or sympathize with and really are friendly to the Christian faith, but they themselves maybe aren't followers of Jesus. Our whole movement that just, voted overwhelmingly to send President Trump to the White House, in order for us to truly preserve this country that we're in and any semblance of decency and morality, we're going to have to begin to take back ground. The Marxists, the left, and the God-haters, they have taken so much ground over the last 50 to 70 years. We cannot continue drawing lines in the sand and moving the lines down in the sand and then never take back any ground. It's just fundamentally not going to work. We keep losing battle after battle, and occasionally we'll win one, and that's good. But to your point about this issue of biblical truth and not conceding on half of the issues and then try to put your flag down on the other, for example, we've got to take back the whole marriage debate. I mean, we've got to move past, in order to actually take ground, you have to move past just talking about bathrooms and talk about what is marriage, what is a man and a woman, and really take back ground on that issue. So that's my challenge to these Republican lawmakers and fellow conservatives and Christians around the country. We need to start actually having discussions in public about, well, should we really have two men marrying each other? Let's start having that debate, because this is what the left does. They continue to bring up ideas that may not be palatable now, but they talk about it for 10 years, and all of a sudden it's commonplace. So we need to start talking about one man, one woman marriage again, and even though it may seem unpopular, maybe in a decade it'll begin to catch traction.
Absolutely, and not care if people say, oh, well, you're bigoted, you're homophobic. I mean, all of these types of ridiculous, nonsensical terms. I mean, they're going to call us names anyway, and we always need to stand up for the truth and actually ask and answer the question, what is best for society? What does a moral and upright society look like? Why do we have these values that have spanned millennia, that have always been a part of civil society, and the institution of marriage has always been between one man and one woman? It's not just about being rooted in tradition, but being rooted in morality. And if we don't take those steps to say, well, we are going to challenge what has now become the normalized status quo, then we are just going to continue to cede ground, because there's no way that we can plant this flag here and successfully defend it. And so this is why AFA Action is doing a lot of great work. And so in just the last minute I have with you, Walker, how can people engage there and be a part of the work that AFA Action is moving the ball forward in terms of policy?
Yeah, the best way to stay involved is to follow our AFA Action social media handles, where we put up nearly daily, if not weekly, updates on what we're doing in government and policy. And also sign up for our emails over at afaaction.net, afaaction.net. Right there on the homepage, you can sign up. But the last thing I want to say, which you alluded to, is that if some of these people like Nancy Mace, once again, who has been good and vocal on this issue of men and women's restrooms, but yet wants to say that she's fully in support of gay marriage, the problem with this, to your point, is that none of this, it's not acceptable to the left that you have any strong moral viewpoint. They don't want you to have any strong viewpoint. And an exhibit A of this, and then I'll wrap it up, is that President Trump both said he's fine with same-sex marriage and he's okay with some kind of abortion at a certain number of weeks, and the left still called him Hitler. So you cannot make these people happy.
Yeah, of course. And so we should stand for truth and not give them anything, because if we're trying to do that for our benefit, it's not going to work anyway. Stand for the truth. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
This is Walker Wildman with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
Walker, not far from the conflict in the Middle East right now, Mahmoud was an Islamic cleric. He accepted the invitation of a Christian friend to attend a Bible study.
I was born and brought up in a Muslim family. I started reading the Bible not to know the Word of God, but to find out the faults.
The Holy Spirit would convince Mahmoud he was a sinner and there was no other name under heaven by which to be saved except that of Jesus. He was labeled an infidel, kicked out of his village, his family's left him. He's never seen them since. But today he's a pastor and a church planter. You know, he's planted 15 churches ranging from 13 to about 30 people, and he's praying for Bibles there in the Middle East. In this season of Thanksgiving, we want to bless 4,000 Bibleless believers. You've done it for 1,000. We've got 3,000 to go by November 30th at $5 a Bible, $100 sends 20. Will you give generously today?
Give generously at 800-YES-WORD, 800-YES-WORD, or visit sendbiblesnow.org, sendbiblesnow.org.
So right now may be the perfect time for you to rethink how you pay for health care. And here's why. This time of year is decision time for a lot of people, but it's also when you can join Medi-Share and save even more than usual. For many families, joining Medi-Share means saving about $500 a month, which is a game changer for a lot of people, obviously. But what's more, Medi-Share members like it a lot. Their satisfaction rate is 98%. Imagine that. And Medi-Share is a proven thing, too, for over 30 years. It's a Christian community of hundreds of thousands of people now. And here's the thing. If you join before November 30th and you mention the promo code SHARE, they'll waive your application fee, so you save even more right off the bat. I'll give you the number here in a second, but just call and you'll get a price within 2 minutes. And again, the deadline is November 30th, so call now and you'll save even more. Here's the number, 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE, 833-44-BIBLE.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. The University of California, Los Angeles is going through a pronoun crisis. Posters have been plastered on dorm rooms across campus urging students to respect diversity and avoid using terms like freshmen and guys. Students have also been told that all conversations with classmates should start with a clarification of their preferred pronouns. UCLA recently hosted a workshop called Pronouns Matter. In this postmodern era, she and he are no longer vogue. Instead, UCLA is advocating for inclusive language, and they've introduced a whole new set of pronouns: they, fair, fairs, v, ver, vers, and z, zem, zers. The good news is most Americans consider these make-believe pronouns to be a load of grade A hooey, 65% to be exact. The bad news is that roughly 35% of the country really does believe you can self-identify as a horse or an azalea bush. I'm Todd Starnes.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, the New York case, the hush money case of Donald Trump, seems to be just completely postponed until after the term, the second term of Donald Trump. So it seems like this is a win, at least for now. But what are the potential possibilities in terms of perhaps resurrecting sentencing after Donald Trump leaves office? Where are we situated? So let's bring in Ron Coleman, who is an attorney and the host of the Coleman Nation podcast. So Ron, I've been watching some of these reports about, how, and of course Trump is saying this is a total win, which obviously pushing off sentencing is a win, and Alvin Bragg's office has said, yes, to that. But what is the actual posture of this case? I mean, could he theoretically be sentenced in 2029?
Theoretically, I suppose, in the world of how these captured prosecutors see things, I suppose it is possible, but it is inconceivable. I mean, it's conceivable, but it's not really possible. It's not going to happen. No, it will be unprecedented. Trump would be well into his 80s. The prosecutors will have changed personnel by then, and there would be a large number of very substantial legal objections to it. I mean, I would think, just as someone who doesn't practice criminal law, but we are really in unprecedented territory here, I do think it would be more likely that there would be continued litigation in the appellate courts during the Trump presidency. Why not resolve the legal questions? Why should the president of the United States have legal threats hanging over his head while he's in office? There's something really problematic with that.
Yeah, and in some of these, I mean, if the scenario had happened that Donald Trump wasn't reelected, and so this did move forward, and sentencing was set for this past week, that obviously was postponed. There were still some outstanding questions, like, does the Supreme Court immunity decision bear any weight on some of the testimony that was allowed in at trial? And would that necessitate, at minimum, a new trial, or, some of these other questions? And it would seem like if the prosecution is intent on not just outright dismissing the case and saying, okay, fine, we lost, that those things would at least be resolved. Because, my concern here is that, as you said, we're in unprecedented times. And even though, because this is what has happened, is that the sentencing has gotten postponed. I mean, I don't see anywhere where the case has actually been dismissed, so it still is hanging there. And that's not really a great way to go through the next 4 years if you're Donald Trump.
Agreed. It's a big policy problem, and again, it's the kind of thing that we just didn't have to worry about before Trump derangement syndrome became an acceptable career theme for state prosecutors.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it seems like, while, of course, the MAGA world and Trump is hailing this as a total victory, just knowing the weight of the weaponization of government and how the left, they have tried at every turn to get Trump wherever they can. I don't see Alvin Bragg just kind of going quietly into the night and going, well, the American people have spoken, so oh well.
No.
And, just agreeing, all right, fine, you guys won and we'll play nice now. So this will be interesting, to see how all of this shapes up. And meanwhile, some of the, of course, the other litigation with the DOJ has been wrapped up. Those things are being dismissed, and so that is a final conclusion. But the sentencing is still something that I think is worth paying attention to, and at least worth following, to ensure that this isn't something that rears its ugly head, 4 years down the road when everybody's virtually forgotten about it. But the other big trial and big legal issue that was going on this week, of course, was this absolutely tragic trial in the murder of Laken Riley, the young Georgia student who was just brutally murdered by an illegal immigrant. And of course, the AP and other leftist outlets were not willing to actually call this man an illegal immigrant, just said, he sparked the immigration debate. No, this is specifically about the Biden administration allowing him to relocate to Georgia on a taxpayer-funded flight and be in the proximity to have the availability to murder this young woman. And the thing that really, honestly, Ron, makes me mad from a justice standpoint is that now, while this man was found guilty, rightly so, he was sentenced to life in prison instead of the death penalty. And it was because the Georgia prosecutor did not seek the death penalty, so they didn't enter into the death penalty phase. And just from a justice standpoint, I don't see that is actually total justice. I would have loved to see the death penalty be implemented in a case like this.
It is an outrage. It's universal. The only people who have anything to say in defense of the prosecutor here are basically anti-death penalty. And that's a position. It's not one I agree with, although it is one I can understand because of, it could be a moral position, which I don't think is particularly well-grounded. That's just my personal opinion. Or it could be a practical position, which is based on the fact that because there are mistakes and because prosecutors are, as we just discussed in the previous topic, prosecutors are awful people in many circumstances, and also because mistakes get made, we don't, there's a reason not to employ the death penalty. But that wasn't the reason that the prosecutor gave. The reason she gave was some preposterous social justice nonsense. And that's really, really offensive. But guess what? That's what the people of Georgia, or the people of that county, voted for when they elected her district attorney. That's the problem with politicization of these positions. And there is nothing in government anymore that has become, there's this concept, as you well know, in civil service, that there are political appointments and there are career appointments. And the concept was that the people who are career appointees, and I'm really using federal nomenclature, but the concept still holds true in state governments as well, are people who are lifers. And yes, you might come in and get someone who is either elected or appointed to be the head of a department as a set policy, but that there's going to be a cadre of people who are career civil servants dedicated to just doing the job right. That's gone. Look what happens at the Justice Department. Look what happens to virtually every department of the federal government, and it's happened to state government too. Really, the only answer is a massive, massive reduction in the size and power of government. The problem is there's one part of government that everyone agrees has to still exist, and that's criminal prosecution.
Yeah, and this underscores why voters really do need to pay attention to the people who are elected, but also who are political appointees. And so, while in many instances the district attorney is the elected position, who they hire are just up to them. It's not up to the will of the people to hire or fire the people under them. But whoever is the elected DA, certainly that drives the motivations, the biases, and even if we're not talking about politics, still the overall judicial philosophy. And so, and prosecutorial philosophy. And so when you're talking about, as you rightly noted, Ron Coleman, this ridiculous statement saying, that this is for some kind of social justice. I mean, this obviously is someone who is a leftist who is taking into account the illegal immigrant status, and that has really nothing whatsoever to do with the specific conduct. Now, in terms of holding the Biden administration accountable, in terms of the overall deportation idea that Donald Trump is going to implement in that policy, I mean, sure, we can have those debates, but as far as just looking at the crime that was committed in the confines of that courtroom, his status, his skin color, his age, his identity, none of that is relevant at all to the fact that he murdered.
Way to make policy.
Yeah, that he murdered this young woman, and just from the morality standpoint, I mean, you're absolutely right that when there is a question potentially that the prosecution could have gotten it wrong. Then maybe in some of those instances, like the Innocence Project, some of those things can come into play, and those are very valuable organizations. But here, there was really no question. I mean, the judge returned his verdict, because this was a bench trial, in 19 minutes. He was absolutely convinced of this person's guilt. And the only argument that I've heard relatively persuasive against the death penalty is the exorbitant expense that it costs to keep an inmate on death row compared to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Because when we impose the death penalty, unlike when our country was originally founded, we don't execute quickly. I mean, you have years and decades of appeals. So in that sense, is there maybe a policy argument to say, well, the appeals are even heightened for death row inmates, where it makes a little bit more of a judicial economy sense, if not an overall notion of justice argument?
I think, the fact that there are so many appeals and that they are I have to tell you that everything we hear about death penalty cases is spun. And there are entire NGOs, nonprofits that have sprung up around saving people who are on death row and telling stories about how they've been railroaded, which play on fears. I think you alluded to earlier in American history, play on fears that go back to the Jim Crow era, to the time of lynching, to 100 years ago or 75 years ago, which really are not relevant anymore. The death penalty is not a field of my expertise, but I would say, if I have any field of expertise, but I would say that the policy choice here, the idea that this prosecutor has some duty to protect an entire ethnic group, or even then I don't know, is it an ethnic group or is it the category of illegal immigrants, or what exactly is the community she is protecting here? I don't even understand, by the way, what's the logic? He was convicted of a crime. He was convicted of a vicious murder. How does whether he gets the death penalty or whether he serves life in prison have an effect on this community that he's supposedly an exalted representative of? I just don't get it.
Yeah. And because it makes logically no sense. And this is where the leftists always prioritize their virtue signaling over rationality in every instance, because it doesn't have any sort of logical conclusion. And this should offend our notions of fairness, of justice, when those types of political calculations are met. And so even though I'm very glad that he was found guilty, there is a measure of justice that will be served. At least he will be behind bars without the possibility of parole. This still, and I've posted this several times on X over the last couple of days, really, in my view, there's not actual justice unless and until the death penalty is implemented in this case. And that's my opinion. And I think that in circumstances like this, it is absolutely not just a moral option, but the only moral position to advocate for the government carrying the sword, as Romans 13 says. So the government absolutely can impose the death penalty when due process has occurred. Of course, that shouldn't be a political calculation, but it shouldn't be a political calculation to not impose it. But in the last 2 minutes that I have with you, Ron Coleman, I want to shift gears here a little bit. You are actually in Pennsylvania right now dealing with the McCormick recount. So, give us kind of an update of of what's going on with that whole situation.
Well, everyone understands that there is absolutely no mathematical way that the recount that's taking place now could have any effect on the outcome of this election. It is something that is simply it's a vanity project that Mark Elias, I'm sure, pressed on Senator Casey. Not that I'm sure that he needed all that much convincing. These people think that the world revolves around them. I can tell you that in the county where I am, which is Columbia County, Pennsylvania, the recount is really being done arguably meticulously to a fault. They really do have a very good electronic voting and accountability system here, which is very well implemented, and the recount is very rigorous. But it isn't really a good system if you're doing recounts 2 weeks after an election in a situation where the number of outstanding potential votes cannot possibly affect the outcome of the election. But on the other hand, it is good to come out to a place where there's actual old-fashioned bipartisan mutual respect and responsibility for doing things right. This is not Bucks County. Bucks County is, essentially a blue county, although it did go red, notwithstanding what the election commissioners tried to do there. This is basically in the Midwest. I mean, we're in part of Pennsylvania here that is much more in common with Ohio than with the Northeast. And
Well, speaking of, the Mark Elias group and the Democrats, I mean, I can imagine if this were Republicans and the RNC's lawyers that were going in and trying to get Pennsylvania to count what have been characterized, I think, rightfully as illegal ballots. I mean, they're ballots that, for whatever reason, did not abide by the Pennsylvania process, and asking for those ballots to be counted. I mean, this is the type of thing that, that lawyers have been disbarred over, and yet I don't see any sort of consequences for the DNC other than, Governor Josh Shapiro coming out and saying, no, this isn't going to work, and, all of that, and kind of, hush the whole thing and saying no as a Democrat. But these types of lawsuits were able to be filed without any real consequence. So it seems to me that seems like the double standard in this case.
It sure is. And, rather than going after lawyers for the DNC, I believe that I have your vote on this. We need to implement firmly a policy that we simply don't go after lawyers, whether it's political or otherwise, unless you've actually got them, literally engaging in violent conspiracy with their clients or something like that, like in the Blind Sheet case. It is what happened to you, what happened to Rudy Giuliani, what's happening to lawyers for Trump, even now. That nonsense has got to stop. And of course, it's a double standard. If the Democrats didn't have double standards, they'd have no standards at all.
Well said. And you do have my vote on that, because rather than just everybody going after everybody over genuine lawyering, we should reserve that to the instances where there is actual malpractice, malfeasance, and some of those things that that bar licensure organizations are supposed to hold attorneys accountable for. But but of course, nothing ever happens to the Democrats. But Ron Coleman, really appreciate your update there and your commentary on everything. So we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
Just because your kids are grown doesn't mean you won't still face some challenges as a parent. Next time on Focus on the Family, Dr. Gary Chapman offers practical help on navigating the relational issues that often crop up between parents and their adult children. Good insights for your family on the next Focus on the Family with Jim Daly.
Focus on the Family is heard each weekday morning at 5 o'clock Central on American Family Radio.
And when you go through your times of fear, what it says here is this: the angel of the Lord, meaning Jesus Christ, will come and literally encamp around you. The word encamp means to fortify you, to build a hedge around you and protect you in the midst of the fearful experience.
Dr. David Jeremiah continues his series, God, I Need Some Answers, next time on Turning Point.
5:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. Central on American Family Radio.
As the world changes in an era of crisis, families throughout America are experiencing instability, fear, and great loss. While many are searching for answers in places of desperation, the position and mission of the church has never been more clear. It's time for us to leave the buildings and saturate the streets with redemptive hope and the love of Jesus. Saturate USA is a movement of churches and believers across America, uniting as one to reach every home with the love of the gospel. At SaturateUSA.org, you and your church can join the movement by adopting a zip code and receiving free neighborhood maps and evangelistic materials, including Jesus Film DVDs with free online streaming. Simply mobilize your volunteers, assemble your saturation packs with free materials and your own church's information, and then send out teams to distribute to homes. Let's partner together and see every zip code in America adopted for Christ. Join the movement at SaturateUSA.org.
Every day, babies in their mothers' wombs are fighting for life, with abortion being the leading cause of death.
I already had my mind made up. I was like, I'm going to go through with it.
The Ministry of Preborn has pregnancy centers nationwide, standing by to help young moms in crisis choose life. Preborn is the largest provider of free ultrasounds in the country. By letting a mother see her baby in the womb and hear the heartbeat, she's 80% more likely to choose life for her baby.
I came seeking termination, but once I got here and I took an ultrasound, I was overjoyed when I found out that I was having 3 baby boys.
Preborn's mission is to help save babies' lives and souls. To find out more, go to preborn.com. That's preborn.com. Or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. Your love can save a life.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And speaking of the godless worldviews that result in ultimately utter confusion, but also perpetuating a culture of death, this is a story that you probably haven't heard about coming from Switzerland and over in the Netherlands. There is a creator of something that is called a sarcopod, which it was designed to allow a person to basically commit suicide and to die within minutes in a reclining seat after pushing a button, which then would inject nitrogen gas into a sealed chamber. So, this is basically, speaking of the death penalty, basically a self-imposed gas chamber, and it's absolutely violently abhorrent to any sort of notion of respect for the dignity of human life. But the creator is now under fire, and this is coming from the express.com because and the headline is, "The creator of suicide capsule breaks silence after first customer dies with strangle marks." So there is now some controversy over how exactly the customer who used this suicide capsule actually died. But the overall idea of just having this type of device anyway and allowing people to facilitate their own suicide in a way that now society, or at least this creator over in the Netherlands is helping facilitate, is just further perpetuating this whole idea of so-called completed life bills that we even find here in the United States, of saying that, if you are at whatever age, you just decide that, I've completed my life and I don't want to deal with the hazards of growing older, so I want to have physician-assisted suicide. I mean, all of these things are, and fundamentally, they're immoral, but they fundamentally offend the notion of human dignity and of human beings having the image of God and being created in God's image. And this is why the pro-life position, the biblical worldview position, is not just to be a pro-life at the moment of conception, but all the way until natural death, that man does not have any say over the time that we are conceived and born, or over the time that we die, that our days are numbered by the Lord himself. So joining me now to discuss this philosophy and all of this and more is our good friend Ryan Helfenbein, who is the executive director of the Standing for Freedom Center at Liberty University. And Ryan, this is just a really disturbing story, I think.
Yeah, I fully agree. It's the outcome of a worldview that attempts to emancipate itself ultimately from God, who is our creator. We're all created in his image. Not everyone is a child of God. I think it's an important distinction to be made biblically. To become a child of God means you're adopted into the family of God by faith through Jesus Christ, but we're all made in his image, and we all have inherent dignity and worth because we're made in his image. And so at the moment of natural birth, conception, we have this inherent dignity, but also to the point of natural death, as you said earlier, it's so important to recognize that the culture of death, which ultimately begins with this understanding that if man is emancipated from God, we're no longer beholden to God for our life, our worth, our value, meaning, purpose, all of that then humanism defines the meaning and value of life. Humanism defines a life worth living. And so people then come to some sort of narcissistic view of self, and ultimately that narcissism can be expressed in, having no value for others, and it can also be expressed in having no value for self. So there are folks who are struggling with mental health issues. There's a mental health crisis in the West, and a lot of it is attributed to this spiritual and moral decline that we're seeing. People no longer understand the value of life and what their life is really given for. And because of that, I think people are coming to the end of it and saying, it's not worth anything. I'm going to take my own life. So there is a slippery slope here, Jenna, and that is not only taking of your own life, but also the slippery slope is once you begin to get a society or a culture accustomed to suicide, you also get you also have forced euthanasia as well. At some point, there is the fear of death panels and that sort of thing that happened in Hitler's Germany. But there are all kinds of other expressions of this that can crop up, medical death panels and the like. But this is bad enough. The idea that this could be made legal, it should not be made legal. It is the second leading cause of death. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in the United States from ages 20 to 34. It is also the leading cause of death of veterans who have come back from war, particularly Iraq and Afghanistan. More of our veterans have died as a result of suicide and mental health than they actually did in combat. So it's very important to note this trend is going up because of a mental health crisis, and I think you and I both recognize this trend has a lot to do with the spiritual and moral decline that we're experiencing in the West.
Absolutely. So well said, Ryan, because if we find and derive our value as human beings from our own sense of self and our own self-image, then there are two sides of that coin. I mean, one, it can be very overinflated, and we see then the selfishness and then the worldview of everyone else's life is not valuable. And this is where you get to the immoral decision making of women who have abortions on demand for socioeconomic reasons or even just lifestyle reasons. I mean, the epitome of selfishness is murdering your own child just to have the lifestyle that you prefer. And then on the flip side of that, having and determining your own self-image that you know that you are not the be-all and end-all, and this life is very hard, and so you end up in utter despair. But either of those tracks, whether it's an overinflated self-image or an undervalued self-image, which actually is the trans movement as well, by the way, and I want to say that very clearly, people who mutilate their bodies and who say, or who even are, the cross-dressers of people like this new Representative McBride and all that, that is devaluing and actually degrading their own body because they are undervaluing what God has designed. But either of those tracks of overvaluing or undervaluing is because we cannot put a value in and of ourselves and our own identity. Our identity and our value has to be derived from Christ himself. Otherwise, we end up in total despair, either track. And that's what I see as all of these stories, whether, it's the death panels you were referring to, it's abortion, it's physician-assisted suicide, it's, creations like this monstrosity. I mean, all of these things are trying to address an issue of a world without God. That's the problem.
Yeah, totally. I see this, and it is so important. I think it's important, even as you point out, the trans movement, this idea that we have a self outside of our own body, which God created, and he ultimately created it in his image. It's not just a functional utilitarian shell, that we can do whatever we want with that body. Even as we look to the Christian truth claims in Scripture, right out of 1 Corinthians, Paul says to the church that your body is a living temple that is ultimately devoted to God for the purposes of worship. The highest expression of human value, dignity, and worth is worship unto God. And that worship is not just given in the form of praise and song and all of that. That's important, but just in a state of being, just in a state of the fact that we are living and breathing creatures created in his image, that alone is enough. And so there are some people out there that are have real struggles, health struggles, financial struggles, all kinds of things, and they might think, they succumb to that ultimate deception. My life is not valuable. My life is not worth living. I will take my own life. Suicide, self-murder. And that is a lie. And that lie goes all the way back to Genesis 3, right there in the garden. Hath God said? Did God really say? That's a lie directly from Satan. We have to remember that promise that was given all the way in Genesis chapter 1. The first person who ever speaks in all of creation is God. And what he said about us is true, that we were made male and female in his image. And that is everything when it comes to life and meaning and purpose and value. But the next part of that is our alienation from God. The reason we have mental health, the reason we have spiritual and moral issues is because we have a sin problem, there is a brokenness, and we need a Savior because we cannot fix ourselves. So the answer is not this nitrogen-filled gas chamber of death. It's not Joseph Mengele, but the answer is Jesus Christ, who came into this world. This is why we have Christmas. This is why we're heading into the holiday of Thanksgiving, which is dedicated to praise and devotion, worship to the Lord. But then also the Advent season, that joy came into the world, and his name is Jesus, and he is our only rescue from a meaningless life.
Amen and amen. And this is why we stand up for the truth and we fight these all-important battles, because this isn't about affirming a lifestyle. It's not just about this being sin, which of course it is, but it's ultimately, if we really love our fellow humans in the way that God loves us, then we do not want to see them mired in sin and despair that ultimately leads to this culture of death. And we certainly do not want our government to approve and license that. I mean, this is why we stand for pro-life policies, why we stand affirming traditional marriage, affirming gender that is given by God, defined by him, defined by his biology. I mean, all of these things have a moral implication that we can't escape from. This isn't about anything other than truth and about advancing the truth of the righteousness of Christ, and that our identity is wholly in him, and that everything that we do individually, in our families, in our churches, and our civil society must reflect that truth, and ultimately that is for our good. That is the only way that we get to human flourishing. It is not about stopping people from their desires. It's about showing them what is the best for them. And so I hope, Ryan, with this conversation, people are understanding of that and maybe see some of these things in a new light and say, this is why things like the Capitol Hill bathroom policy actually does matter. It matters morally, and it doesn't matter in terms of what names people call us or whatever. It matters that we stand firmly on truth. So we only have about a minute left, but final comments from you.
Yeah, final comments. This is framed so beautifully, Jenna. It's such an important topic, and I appreciate your program and the fact that you are drawing attention to this. Jesus' words, his own words, is that the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But I have come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. We have to recognize God's love for us. God's love is everything. It means everything. And we don't only have a say over our own life, but he does as well. And it was a life worth giving up his own life for. And that's something to remember. So there are people out there who might even be listening to your program who are struggling with this ultimate question and might even be considering taking their own life. But I want to point them to the hope of Jesus Christ. That matters, especially in this season.
Amen. Let's continue to promote the truth of the gospel of Christ. Thanks so much, Ryan. You can always reach me and my team, Jenna at afr.net. Go speak the truth.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family